Well, what do you know? I'm here, just walking around, just getting my exercises in. Hey, just as good as that wellness pod. I think you'll agree. Now, I'm here to introduce live for me, not so much for you, but it's just good to have another human to interact with rather than a screen. I'm introducing here for the commercial sponsorship in a braver new world. We have Paul Gardner, a man that I was just talking to off air then, who I think I enjoy because we've basically got the same fashion principles. Any man in a checkered grey suit jacket is fine with me. So, ladies and gentlemen, here he is live at Fed Square, Paul Gardner.
Oh, thank you, Dave. It's great to be here, although in reality with Melbourne, it's great to be anywhere, even though I think that Melbourne at the moment kind of resembles the reality show Married at First Sight when Elizabeth returned, it's a bit weird, but we are here. We are talking to no one. Live anyway. So thank you once again for having me. I want to talk today about the sponsorship in a brave new world. But before I do that, I want to draw an analogy back to an old new world. And I want us to just go back for a little while, to go back 530 years, which for many people that are rugby fans would realise that's probably the last time that Australia held the Bledisloe Cup. But going back all that time to the 15th century is interesting because what happened just before that time, was the Black Plague that wiped out 1/3 of Europe. So we have a situation where 1/3 of the world's been wiped out by a pandemic, and now we come to this situation in 1492 where something big is going to happen. Okay, so it's back to a time of optimism, discovery, and conquistadors, when the world was thought by many people to still be flat. And adventure was entertained throughout all the palaces of Europe. It was back to Spain, who then ruled the New World. And just as important, it was back to one man, an Italian of all persons. It was back to Christopher Columbus. Now, as every American schoolboy and schoolgirl, and probably a few Australian schoolboy and schoolgirls know, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Now, I want to say that that's interesting as an historical fact, apart from the fact that we think he may have invented AirPods, but I doubt it. But the interesting thing for us in 1492 was this was a commercial sponsorship that followed a pandemic. The commercial sponsorship was genuine. Why was it a sponsorship? Well, first and foremost, his sponsors were King Ferdinand and a young Queen Isabella, even though someone did tell me they thought the underbidders were Harvey Norman and Sportsbet. But it was a genuine sponsorship. And it was a genuine commercial sponsorship because Columbus was charged with 3 key facts, 3 key results, KPIs he had to achieve. The first one he had to achieve was, can you possibly find a waterway between Europe and Asia? The second one, can you bring back as much treasure as your boat can possibly carry? And the third one that Columbus was charged with was, can you possibly globalise Catholicism? Now, let's think about that for a moment from a commercial point of view. There were 2 quantitative and 1 qualitative. Now, how many of us out there today, when we're building a sponsorship program, think that's a great idea? Because I do. 2/3 of the KPIs should be about something that's measurable and achievable. So you can go back to your sponsors, you can go back to your prospects and clients and say, you said to do this and we've done it. And the third one, if you have to have something, make it as broad as globalising Catholicism, which hasn't had its moments. So when he set off in the 15th century, Columbus, he did so with 3 ships, the Santa Maria, La Nina, and the Pinta. I'm going to concentrate a bit on those ships. Now, unfortunately, he also set off with smallpox and measles and bubonic plague into a world that was overseas travellers. So who would ever think that overseas travellers would carry a disease into a country? This is 1492. It could be 2020. Today, I want to concentrate on what that's got to do with commercial sponsorship. It was his choice of ships that something really interested me for us looking at what post-COVID sponsorship might look like. I mean, let's start with the Santa Maria. He loved this ship. This was a hell of a ship. It was 36 metres long. It had a deck. It had 3 masts. It had a forecastle. It had a stern castle, which I assume is at the back somewhere. And it was armed with bombards that fired granite balls. This was a ship that a person should discover a new world in. Trust me, you didn't muck around with the Santa Maria. And yet, even with such formidable transport at his disposal, Columbus was more than a little uneasy, notwithstanding the fact that most people he knew still thought he was suicidally just going to walk off the edge of the earth, just plummet off the edge and never be seen again. But apart from that minor geographical uncertainty, what if he got to the brave new world, he thought, and he got stuck on a reef? He couldn't go on. What if he couldn't navigate the new oceans that he found? What if there were waterways that only took him some way, but he couldn't get all the way through from Europe to Asia, his first KPI? What if his crew, which was containing, I guess, the 1492's versions of Gen Ys or Millennials, actually didn't have the balls of granite and as such mutinied? Jesucristo in the Spanish. What if she sank? In other words, Columbus was really, really worried about whether the old, tried and tested ways of navigation would suit the new world conditions that he found himself in. So to be on the safe side, he decided to take 2 more ships, La Nina and the Pinta. They were both roughly half the size of the Santa Maria. Of course, he had no doubt that neither of those would do anything special. After all, the Santa Maria, now that was a ship. That was the kind of the ship you went and conquered new lands in. It was big, it was imposing. He would stand on the deck with his arms outstretched, dressed in his fighters and say, "Look at me, I am like a god, bow to me." The Nina and the Pinta, yeah, they're there, but, we ain't going to need these ships at all. But maybe, just maybe, for the brave new world Columbus was about to find, he needed a brave new approach. Which brings us, commercially, if not circumnavigationally, to today's braver new world. Namely, what will sponsorship look like in 2020 when we eventually get out of this mess? In these modern post-pandemic times, all of us involved in meetings and events, whether it's sponsorship property owners or buyers or sellers, we need to explore and understand what our own commercial armada needs to look like as we move forward. So let's start by considering sponsorship's version of the Santa Maria. Traditional, reliable, steady, predictable, grand old matriarch. The kind of ship that you're already in and you're proud to be in as you sail around the MCG on Grand Final Day. We know that old faithfuls such as the AFL will eventually return to normal. Although it's almost like life itself, I guess, which we know it's on, but it's not really that exciting and it's not really that entertaining and it's actually a bit dull and you sort of wonder why they just cancel the whole thing, but that's just a personal opinion as a Melbourne supporter. Now, the interesting thing here, if you're watching the AFL, I'm sure you are, because there's nothing else on, is the way they're currently looking at, yes, there's the AFL, but it's kind of different, okay? We've learnt that all the Melbourne clubs are going over to Queensland. We understand once and for all that there's going to be canned laughter and canned applause and canned boos on the television, even though the players can't hear it. But also the other thing is they're actually doing augmented reality. Have you noticed that in the stands where the people used to live? They're trying to put the sponsor signs there. Now, if you go back 4 or 5 years when they first tried it, there was a terrible outcry. Everyone said, it doesn't look, it's fake, it doesn't look real, it's terrible, it's just another con to get more sponsorship money. Today, not one article, not one thing has mentioned it. And you know that as we go forward, the AFL Santa Maria will still have augmented reality as a key part of what it does. Now, whether it still has the Coles logo in the middle of the ground for a reason I can't understand at all, unless Curtis Stone's going to play centre-half forward at some stage or be the pre-game entertainment. But the augmented reality, you can see the AFL will use this position. They have a free kick. They have the opportunity to say, well, we kind of experimented with things. We kind of thought that maybe we could play a lot of games in a hub. We can play more games during the midweek. We can play with augmented reality. We can play with canned laughter. So I thought, does that mean? Well, if you're looking at an AFL perspective as a sponsor, potential sponsor, you can say, why don't we play on a Wednesday afternoon or Wednesday night? Why don't the AFL just take over all the ticketing for the AFL clubs and then it doesn't matter when they play. We'll pay. You don't have to worry about crowds. We'll sort that out. We can sort that out with augmented reality. So that's going to be a brave new world. And like the AFL, the NRL and most other mainstream sports, you'd imagine will soon return to once again over-dominate the print media and saturate our television stations, whilst myriad sponsorship proposals and game day president luncheons for rubbery chicken will soon, no doubt, ebb back into our email boxes. That is the way life was, and for many sports, they're hoping that is the way life will be. Racing will eventually welcome back crowds, cinemas will screen, theatres will stage, and fun runs will return to being, well, I think anything but fun, but that's a personal opinion. And just as sure as there will be another series of Lego Masters where the contestants actually act like Ninja Warriors, and Ninja Warriors where the contestants actually jump around on Lego sets, there is no doubt that sponsorships that were tried and tested will return from commercial hibernation one day. One day soon, maybe. They'll be a bit different, but they'll be back. As a case in point, Nestlé recently announced it would extend its partnership with the Australian Institute of Sport, and we're seeing every day more and more extensions and more. Yeah, I'll get behind you, I'll get behind you. I don't know whether that's at a lesser rate or the bigger rate or value in kind, but they're starting to come on back. They're coming back to sponsors. But my sense, my own personal sense, is that this is going to be the exception rather than the rule. And it certainly, most certainly, will not be business as usual for everyone. Think about women's sport, which in some areas such as AFLW has only really started to get a foothold and still requires a great deal of sponsor or maybe even philanthropic investment, money which may not be any longer forthcoming. What about the arts, where sponsorships often are considered more of a, well, it's kind of a nice thing to do, you know. We can't really measure against an ROI. There's no real KPI, but we kind of think we should be involved in some way, shape or form. It rounds out what we're doing, which is a common thing. How do we evaluate that? What about community events on point, like Mardi Gras and Pride March? They'll no doubt continue. But what about those other ones that are more nebulous and generic, like Vivid, Dark Mofo, Comedy Festival, Moomba? Will the money still be there in the same quantum? And what about those that are appearing to lose community support, like, dare I say it, Australia Day, or even fireworks, as we saw with the fires earlier this year? Fireworks are starting to lose their appeal. How will they survive? Or in fact, will they survive in a sponsorship environment post-COVID? Is that the Santa Maria that's going to sink? Then there are the non-mainstream charities. Will they still grab corporate's attention? Or have we learnt from Celeste Barber that that is the way to raise money? To empower community to help, rather than here's another commercial, here's another way of, same way of approaching it. To raise that amount of money she raised is amazing. And it came out of the blue. That wasn't Santa Maria, the way to raise money in charities. That was La Pinta, the one you never thought was going to happen. Is that our life today? Well, for a start, we all know there's going to be less money, a lot less money, not just this year, but for years to come. And we're already witnessing it. There's some instances. Media Australia, which is Australia's largest out-of-home media operation, has just announced a drop of 65% in revenue year to date. Whilst Network 10 has reported a $226 million loss. We have 4 in 10 independent media agencies claiming revenue cuts of up to 50% during the pandemic, and a further 18% companies saying it's 50 to 70% revenue impact to their business. I'm speaking to people who say we're only down 50%, as if it's some sort of, oh, thank God we've survived. Retailers are going out faster than Manchester in a Boxing Day sale. You look at the ones that are going broke day in and day out. In America alone, there have been 17 bankruptcies in just 5 months. Now compare that to last year, where there were 16 for the whole of 2019. Retail is about to get smashed. Other casualties besides retail? Local papers, we've already seen news, already cut them. Traditional department stores and malls. Higher education, we saw today, this very day, University of New South Wales cut so many people. Commercial property, who in their right mind would want to be in commercial property now? Big, tall buildings. I know businesses in Docklands, just down the road from here. I can tell you 2 businesses straight away, one public, one not so public. The public one, NAB. Their words, we're going to mothball our commercial properties in Docklands. What does that mean? You're going to mothball them? Does that mean my clothes won't get beaten when they walk in the building? What does that mean? Another one, a big four accounting firm, 4 floors. They said to me, we need 2. $250,000 a floor a year. We go to the landlord and say, we only need 2, you guys sort it out. Why? Because people don't want to come to work anymore. They don't have to come to work anymore. They're not even here. There's no one here. They're at home watching us, hopefully watching us. And I don't have to tell you about all the events, shows and functions from the Tokyo Olympics down that have either been put on hold, held over for a year, or cancelled altogether. The Olympics ain't going to happen. Forget it. This isn't going to happen. Even if you said somehow miraculously next year at this point in time, we're going to be over here, we're ready to go. What about the events that lead up to it? What about the qualifying events? What about the people who didn't make the time to play the Olympics this year, who will make the time to go next year? How do you go against the ones that qualify? It's a basket case. So what does that mean for big companies involved in it? The sporting companies, the vitamin companies that are involved in the Olympics. Do they say, we're going to spend it somewhere else? Or they say, no, we're going to bank the money this year because we're not sure what's going to happen in a year to come. They're going to bank the money. And with virtually every sector of the marketing communications industry facing decline, and the government's no doubt weighing up the merits of community sponsorships versus extending JobKeeper or Job Finder or Job Seeker or whatever acronym is going to be, it must affect sponsorship in terms of quantum and interest. Will it lead to some sort of sponsorship margin erosion or bidding war, or will demand for many events just simply dry up? For many people, including existing and potential clients, this is not just a pause. This will be a restart. It is a time for clients to reconsider, refocus, reconnect, ultimately readjust and remodel. How do I know this? Because that's what we're doing at home. The winners out of COVID are little children and dogs because they think this is fantastic. The dogs are saying, no more walks. I'm walked out. I'm walking 4 times a day. And the kids are saying, everyone's here. My parents are here. My grandparents are here. My friends are here. It's fantastic. We're going to go skateboarding at 10 o'clock in the morning. Great. Dad takes us. Yeah, they're the winners. But for everyone else, for business, they're going to do the same thing. They're going to come back and say, do we really need to be involved in the AFL? Our brand hasn't suffered that much. Why are we paying all this money to have our logo on the ground? As an example, just last week, IBM announced it was weaning itself, these words, not mine, weaning itself off live events, but the digital equivalent was too crowded. What are they going to do? They're going to stop? Where do they go? And what takes the place of IBM Think, which attracted 30,000 attendees to San Francisco last year? That's not even talking about all the other businesses, all the other major conferences, be they charities like Jehovah's Witnesses or Xero or Salescom, all those charities and all those businesses. What are they going to do? I think they're going to bank the money. I think it's going to be incumbent upon them, if their brand hasn't suffered, to say, while our people are on JobKeeper or Job Seeker or looking for work, are we just wasting our money? They're going to reevaluate, and we have to be there to show them how to reevaluate what their sponsorship's worth is today. Not what it was back then when the Santa Maria was floating, what it is today and what's important to you today. Over the last few months, as we know, businesses have got used to not necessarily meeting face-to-face, dealing with customers, staff and other shareholders via Zoom or Skype, because we're not just coming to the office every day. I'm also surprised at the meetings I have between 9:15 and 3, because that's when the kids are at school. When they are at school, that's when they're at school. I've had Zoom meetings with clients, and in the back of the room are blackboards with capital letters written on them in chalk. Now, I assume that's not the clients. I assume that's the kids of the clients. I might be wrong, but that is a big sign for me that people are looking at what they could change. So think about it. How many people do you know? How many young people are saying, I can't afford a house? Housing's out of control in Australia. Right. Here's my chance. where things all collide. If I can work from home 4 days a week and only come to the CBD 1 day a week, why don't I live back out here? Why don't I live on the outskirts of Melbourne where the houses are cheaper? And you know what? I don't have to pay childcare, outrageous costs of childcare every day, because for maybe 3 or 4 days, I can bank the money. I can get a house. I can have a happier life. I don't have to pay the money for the kids. You know what that plays into? For 5 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago, millennials were saying, I don't want to come to work every day. I want flexibility in my work hours. Guess what? Bingo. That's here. 70%, 76%, another stat interesting, of American consumers are using online order pickup for the first time since COVID began. 76%. People are getting used to working and living and enjoying being at home. And that will affect our sponsorships. Because it doesn't take much imagination to understand they may also get used to less live and more virtual attendees at large meetings, exhibitions and conferences, where traditional cost per thousand results become even more meaningless as we seek other new ways to measure engagement. So some of the questions for you out there: will virtual conferences like this become the norm rather than the exception? Will B2B event organisations that still derive the vast majority of their revenue from exhibitors simply cease to exist? Will community empathy for essential services and businesses morph into other opportunities? Will the business, which we all know and love and work in, simply run aground? At salesandmedia.com, my business, we believe that future commercial sponsorship portfolios will still be present, but be far more even-handed across a number of sectors rather than simply skewed across one such as sport. We already have balanced scorecards, we already have balanced sheets. We feel this will be the era of balanced sponsorship portfolios, where each organisation looks to have a returnable investment across 5 key sectors: the arts, sport, education, community and charity. Imagine if you had all your money as a sponsor tied up in one. Let's assume it's NRL. Apart from the fact that the games are wherever the games are, all over the place, every week you have a problem, some bozo beats up his partner, does something wrong, something stupid. There must be a time when you say, I wish I was in something else. If I could get out of this, I would. I know one sponsor, one major sponsor of NRL has said, when our time is up, we will never, ever, ever, ever sponsor them again. Because my stakeholders are 50% female. My board is 50% female. And they are saying to me every week, why do we have to put up with this rubbish? Is it really that good for our brand? In our opinion, the key influencing factors will be around differentiation, relevance, and amplification. Differentiation, relevance, amplification. Will it make our brand stand out for the right reasons? Is it the best option for us today in this space? Does it represent the values we stand for and those the community now demands? And we'll touch on that in a minute. Will it make our key stakeholders proud? And lastly, is it value for money? Is it value for money used to be at the top? It's not anymore. What does this association say about me, say about our brand, and say about our values? That is how we've changed. My sense is that our version of Santa Maria, the one that used to be and will be again one day, will no doubt diminish in importance, or more correctly, sharpen and refocus. It will still represent, I think, around 60% of all sponsorship dollars going forward, about 60% on the way down. And also be much harder earned than ever before. Which means we all need to take stock and modify areas such as timelines, goals, offers, approaches and executions. If we don't do it now ourselves, we'll be forced to. In other words, we'll all need to renovate traditional strategies to lift sponsorship results. And if the sponsorship version of Santa Maria represents about 60% of future sponsorship revenue, what might the other 40% look like? Well, I think that 3/4 of the remaining 40%, or for those not mathematically trained, 30% of the total future sponsorship monies, will find itself sailing like La Nina. They're the sponsorships, or I guess sponsorship ships, that you kind of always knew one day would eventually arrive, yeah? You sort of saw them coming, but COVID just ripped them up, right? COVID just brought them straight to the fore immediately. They've got their time in their sun right now. It's kind of like I saw the other day, they're saying that smart speakers in the home, people are trying to figure out how we can use that to help people shop smarter and purchase faster. They're here faster than anyone anticipated or even possibly prepared for. A sponsorship example, which I think is worth sharing with you, is the recently televised BP Supercars All-Stars E-Series, which saw supercar drivers pit their skills and contest races from their respective homes. I guess many of you caught up with that, yeah? Now, with all the advent of be it Nintendo, Xboxes and PlayStations and the technology of virtual reality and the rapid growth in esports, I guess all of us sort of thought that one day, yeah, this is going to be kind of big, right? But did we ever see us coming this quickly? Figures showed that Fox Sport, that televised this, reached over 158,000 people in total and making it the 5th most watched show on pay TV at the time. It was also watched in New Zealand, the United Kingdom, the USA, India and even Holland, where I guess Verstappen has quite a large following somehow, for some reason. On top of this, 210,000 people watched this whole series through Facebook, which has now been streamed down to over 408,000 times. It was a truly remarkable success, and one which is set to continue even as the supercars return to real track racing. If you are the person out there who is in charge of sponsorship partnerships at BP, take a bow. I never saw it coming. Congratulations. I guarantee that the return you generated greatly exceeded both the cost and your general expectation. Now, a couple of things about that BP Super Series worth noting. First, BP. It was the inaugural, at that time, the one-off E-Series sponsor, has now gone on to become the official fuel sponsor of the Virgin Australian Supercars Championship, which I suspect is some sort of hybrid cash and value in kind deal. So they kind of tried before they bought. So the offer we're putting out there, and you're putting out there to your prospects and clients, can your offer do that? And if so, how does it do that? And is this a further glimpse into our future, where as well as seeing clients move from the physical to the virtual assets over time, we also start to see more and more of them head in the other direction? For those of you who followed this series, there was also an interesting aside when a professional racer, or professional Formula One e-motor racer, suddenly leapt from the back of the pack to miraculously finish third in one of the races, before he admitted that he had handed over the virtual keys to an 18-year-old professional sim racer, whatever a sim racer is. Both were quite rightly disqualified, but just imagine for a moment, if the organisers had have taken that negative and turned it into a positive by establishing some sort of pro-am e-car race where everyday people could chance their luck and race against the best. Imagine this excitement and the hype this could create. Imagine the interest from existing and potential sponsors crying out for a new way to engage their customer base. Now that's something we could really have a La Nina effect. Then there's a third ship, the one we call the Pinter effect, which I would describe as the one you never ever saw coming. A clear distant third in line, and such you didn't even consider. Much like Donald Trump becoming president, I guess. Or Afterpay's share price being worth 4.5 times what NAB's share price is today. Well, you might not have considered, but many have. In a recently released American report called The Future of In-Person Business Economy, 27% of marketing professionals expect attendance at in-person events will not go back to pre-pandemic levels. And it might even be worse than we think. What if COVID restrictions on numbers and social distancing remain in place? What if it's not considered safe to use public transport or even elevators? If face masks become the norm? If breakouts and quarantining become everyday occurrences and disruptors? How will that affect what we do for a living, is meetings and conferences? Additionally, that American report, 51% of respondents said live gatherings will continue to have a virtual element post-pandemic. So they're saying less will attend in person, which makes any sponsorship return per 1,000 even harder to justify. And unless you have some way of reaching and keeping them engaged remotely, your appeal and your event will almost certainly suffer, if not die. And then what happens, to use the Spanish idiom, if the mierda really hits the ventilator? Just look at how quickly things suddenly change almost overnight, and then equally as quickly how that change can spread through the community and become a movement where previously there was no movement. And then how quickly this seemingly inexhaustible movement simply gets overrun by the next community wildfire. As a case in point, social justice movements. Consider hashtag Je suis Charlie, which at the time was the biggest hashtag of solidarity in history. It was used 5 million times on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Now it doesn't even make the top 2. It was displaced first by hashtag #MeToo and then even more recently by hashtag Black Lives Matter. The effect that these and more regular community movements and uprisings have on what we present, how we present and how we deliver is dramatic. For example, from a commercial point of view, hashtag Je suis Charlie didn't really affect much, I guess. Probably sold a few more copies of Charlie Hebdo. But hashtag #MeToo did force a number of companies to change marketing and branding, such as Kleenex, which has changed the name of their man-sized tissues to extra large-sized tissues. Goodness knows what's going to happen if they ever catch someone with MasterChef. That's another story. But hashtag #MeToo was ultimately really more about internal organisational change against gender discrimination, rather than any real outward-facing aspects, in my opinion. But hashtag Black Lives Matter, on the other hand, is truly changing the game commercially, with brands such as PepsiCo scrapping their 130-year-old Aunt Jemima brand, and Drea, Colgate, Nestle and Uncle Ben's all changing famous brand names such as Eskimo Pie, Mrs Butterworth's Pancake Syrup, Cream of Wheat, Darlie Toothpaste, Redskin Lollies and Chico Sweets. You saw yesterday the Washington Redskins are changing their name after their sponsor, IBM, threatened to take away their $18 million sponsorship. They're junking 100 and so years because a sponsor said, you know what, community's changed, we've changed, you changed, we're out. Other sporting teams in America, such as the Chicago Blackhawks, the Atlanta Braves and the Cleveland Indians, are also thinking about changing their brand names because they are no longer relevant today. All because of a single, tragic and unspeakably violent death in Minneapolis, which appalled the world. Now, for those aware of it, there's another one, almost a sequel to hashtag Black Lives Matter. It's called the Stop Hate for Profit movement. Coca-Cola, Hershey, Diageo and Levi Strauss among over 100 brands pledging not to buy ads on Facebook in July. Why just July? I don't know, but it's amid concerns about its role in spreading hate speech and misinformation. So what's next? Will it be climate change as it starts to really affect our personal and commercial lives? If anyone here or out there is even contemplating holding an event in Hong Kong soon, are you serious? And what about New York or Milan or Brazil or India? New Zealand is going to be the place to go and hold an event, right? Post-COVID will not be the old normal. It will be a new world with a reshaped economy. Today, all of us, within and outside of our industries, have an opportunity to reconfigure and reset what commercial sponsorships, meetings and events should look like in the future. Don't lose that opportunity. And just in case you think all's well and good, and you might just stick with the Santa Maria, on Christmas Day in 1492, off the coast of Haiti, Columbus watched the impervious Santa Maria run aground and sink to the bottom of the ocean, never to be recovered. That was the end of Columbus's man of war, or should I say, in homage to Kleenex, his extra large of war. Thank you so much for your time. I'm sure you would have been a wonderful audience.